Hi, I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Prime Vision Network. So today I am joined by Murray McKinnon. He is a CEO of Soltec. Soltec is something that we've invested in on the private equity side. For anyone who follows us, you know we've been talking about food shortages, and from the private equity side, we wanted to address this by investing in fertilizers that are doing something different and really addressing the underlying problem of yield, shortfalls. And I think Murray is the best one to introduce himself and obviously talk about what Soltec is, why is it so revolutionary, and where is it going from here?
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Murray McKinnon, founder and CEO of Soltec Global. We started 6 years ago trying to make a better elemental sulfur product. Elemental sulfur is used in agriculture, and we kept improving the product. And through 6 years of field studies, we actually have made that elemental sulfur actually outperforms synthetic fertilizers. And as you all know, the synthetic fertilizer market is becoming in short supply, higher prices, and we're using basically a byproduct from the oil and gas industries, refining. They use the elemental sulfur, and we're making it micronized. So our mean particle size is 30 micron, and we've made sprayable products, granular products, and powders that are spun on the fields. And we have white papers, years of research that actually show we outperform synthetic fertilizers.
And the one thing that's another interesting piece on those white papers is you talked about, and we've seen that it outperforms in wet and dry conditions. And as we've seen around the world with the droughts and floods, depending on which year we're talking about and which area we're discussing, it seems to become more pervasive. Can you talk about how it outperforms and why it's so important? And really, how is that creating that environmental protection that we're seeing, and why some of the countries like Australia are so interested?
Yeah, so we'll talk about drought first. So synthetic fertilizers are basically a salt. They have a salt index, and so when you're seeding into dry conditions, low moisture conditions, you put your fertilizer, your granular fertilizer, synthetic fertilizers, you put your seed down, it's salt. It actually will pull the moisture away from the seed, affects germination. If you don't have enough moisture, that concentrated synthetic fertilizer, which is instantly available to plants, actually become too concentrated, again, and affect the root structure. So in a drought condition, we don't have that salt index. We don't pull the moisture away. We don't have osmotic pressure. In wet conditions, I'm just going to talk mostly about the sulfates, the sulfur component, which is what we're replacing. Is very highly mobile in soil. It leaches. It's got a really bad problem with leaching. We've been doing a lot of research development with Australia, mostly along the Gold Coast, sugarcane crops. They use a lot of sulfur, about 36 pounds per acre. And the problem is you get these heavy, heavy rains in the sandy soils, and all the sulfates basically leach out of the root zone. They go down into the water table and leak, and they basically run into the ocean. So the great thing about our product, the reason we don't leach, I shouldn't say it, whatever the bacteria is converted, we do leach. So elemental sulfur is not available to the plant. What has to happen is the bacteria eats the sulfur, it excretes it as SO2, and either bonds with oxygen or bonds with the other properties of the soil, and then that's what makes it available to the plant. So yes, whatever sulfates that the bacteria has created and the plant is not uptaken, we would leach away, but it's a smaller portion. So our particle sizes are designed so that we actually deliver sulfates over the entire grow season. Where the problems with synthetic fertilizers, mostly synthetic sulfates, any heavy rains and sandy soils, they wash those sulfates away from the root zone, and they're not there throughout the plant growth. Sulfur is one of those weird elements in plants that it doesn't transferable. So when the plant's young and it's got its early leaf stage, there could be lots of sulfur if you did tissue tests there. But as the plant keeps growing, the sulfur is not mobile in the plant. It stays where it is. So plants need sulfur throughout their entire growth season, and some more than others. For example, canola needs a lot of sulfur when it's forming the seed in the pod. So if you don't have that sulfur available late season, you actually affect the yield of the crop.
And when you talk about, before we started filming, you were talking about the cost competitiveness of what it is. And then can you mention just what kind of cost competitiveness are we looking at? And really, what does that do to the yield? And then round that out with, when you talk about soil rejuvenation, what does that do to the soil over the long term?
So, I'm going to say pre-COVID, pre-supply shortages, 3 years ago, we would save the farmer about $1,200 a section on an oilseed crop like a canola. Today, with today's fertilizer prices, the shortage, the demand problems with synthetic fertilizers, this spring, we were about $6,600 a section. Right now, today in Western Canada, it's $8,500 a section on a typical oilseed crop or corn crop that we're saving the farmers right now. Now, when you talk about the soil benefits, we're not a synthetic. We don't have the osmotic pressure. We don't have the leaching properties. We don't have the off-gassing of nitrous oxide. But one of the biggest advantages using a micronized sulfur that's oxidizing is it actually helps with soil structure. Irrigated lands with high calcium waters, or basically waters with saline in them. So as you build that saline up. So when I said before that the bacteria excretes SO2, we don't always control what the SO2 does. Like I say, if it bonds with the oxygen in the soil, becomes SO4, that's a sulfate, great for the plant. But let's say you have high pH due to calcium. It also can bond with the calcium, becomes calcium sulfate or gypsum, which is actually leachable. And as the rains or irrigation would actually wash that out of the grow zone of the plants. And it does the same with salt, with sodium. So this is where we don't always control what Mother Nature does with the elemental sulfur. So we actually over-apply it a bit, and it's actually safe. You're not going to have any damage by over-applying it. If you over-apply synthetic fertilizers, again, you have there's a glass ceiling above that. You affect plant growth, you affect soil structure, soil sustainability. So over-applying it on especially problem soils. So we might put 35 pounds down of our elemental sulfur for the crop, but we'll put another 25 or 30 pounds down depending on where your soil is and how you're trying to correct it.
Right. And for those that don't know about root burn and all of those fun things, where as you put down more different types of fertilizers, if you put too much, you can create a root burn and you actually destroy the crop, or you then start to damage the soil, which is something that we found in China where, since 2016, they've leveled off and actually started to dip due to over usage of fertilizers, which then, as Murray has pointed out, you're putting down salt, you're putting down other types of contaminants over time. So it's really that balanced approach that's so important when we're looking at maintaining the health of the soil, but also the caloric value. And before we let you go, just to keep it nice and brief, can you talk a bit about the caloric value and some of the benefits that come from using sulfur? Because you've seen some increase in yield on canola oils and some of those other pieces that comes from your product.
Yeah, we always went there thinking we would match the synthetic fertilizers, and we continually having gains, repeatable gains on field trials, strip trials, small plot trials. And we just had some really amazing results on some Timothy hay for export to Japan. And it started having the scientists scratching their head and trying to ask why. So when I kind of talked about sulfur does multiple things, is actually a couple of things. One of them is it affects the soil pH. The higher the pH of the soil, the less ability the plant can uptake nutrients. So sulfur as acidifier, it lowers your pH, right? So it helps there. Nutrients get tied up in the soil. When you get a soil test, you'll say, I have this much potassium, but only a lower level of that is available to the plant. So it gets tied up in the soil matrix. And again, this is from years of synthetic fertilizers and hydrous ammonias. We start to tie this matrix. So the acidification, or they call it weathering, of the soil, matrix, we actually are releasing micronutrients like copper, zinc, magnesium that the plants need. So the micronutrients are then benefiting the plants. So the next one is the NS ratio. The NS ratio is how much, sulfur you need for the plant to effectively take up, nitrogen, but it's also NS, phos sulfur ratio. And for years, there was a lot of sulfates in the soil due to acid rain. With depleted soils like we have mostly around the world, we're actually seeing that everybody assumed it was like a 10-to-1 ratio for sulfur to nitrogen for wheat. Well, it's really 7-to-1 or 6-to-1. Canola used to be 6-to-1. Now they're saying, no, we need to have 4-to-1. And I think they're really seeing what the building blocks of sulfur as far as nutrient uptake is. And then sulfur is a building block for amino acids, Brix content. So if you're talking your protein levels, again, nutrient dense food, you need that sulfur to build the proteins, oil content in seeds, onions and garlic. It's that flavor profile. It's the Brix content. And that building block of that is actually sulfur. So we're seeing not just increase in yield, but we're seeing actually higher grades. People are getting a better grade on their potatoes, on their garlic, on their onions, on those higher value crops.
So as you can hear from the in-depth view and why we're so intrigued from a C6 perspective, when we look at this, you're increasing yield, you're decreasing the consumption of or need of other synthetics, and realistically, you're delivering a solution to the oil and gas industry as well, which I think is another key component, because you're taking sulfur from the processing of it, which is a waste product, and you're giving it new life. You're giving it to what we know is now a growing shortfall. And I'll talk in a few minutes just about some of the issues on the crops, on soil health, soil issues, and why we believe that this is going to be a long-term solution. And I think before we let you go and get to your next meeting, could you talk a bit about where this comes from? Because I had mentioned it comes from the processing of oil and gas. Can you touch on how this process helps the oil and gas industry and how it actually really helps clean it up and makes it that much more, moving it towards the quote unquote ESG goal of the future?
Yeah, I mean, sulfur is what makes oil or gas sour, and we have to clean it up. We have to remove the H2S from it. In doing that, it goes through amine towers and goes through a sulfur recovery unit. And then, but I guess after the amine towers, you have a choice. You can either re-inject it back into the formations, or we, recover the sulfur. And there's other gases and other products that come when they do that. So there's a lot of benefits of actually recovering the sulfur. The problem right now is there's so much sulfur, produced. It's like a waste product. It actually costs the oil and gas companies to make it go away. I mean, there's export sulfur to countries that don't have sulfur for making sulfuric acids and mining and such. Our whole goal our model is to go right on the back of the gas producer and convert it right there into a usable product for soil amendments and plant nutrients. Instead of shipping it somewhere and then again putting energy into to process it and make it into then that plant nutrient or soil amendment. So the idea is to help the oil and gas companies to, instead of just shipping a raw product or a bulk product around there, turn it right into a usable product right at the facility, lower their costs, and actually make it a profitable product for them.
Right. And one last piece is when I know you had the BrightSpot do the work on it, and isn't it where if you put just some solar panels on the top, it's actually a zero carbon emitting process?
Yeah, it's funny is we never thought of it this way. I mean, with all the alternative energy sources there, our whole process is exothermic. So we take it, our plan is to take it right from the clouds at the right temperature, be right next to the facility. So we're not transporting it. We're not having to heat it. We're not having to add any energy to it. And our process is exothermic. We do use a lot of gravity. Our process is high. It falls down linearly. So we have minimal the rotating equipment in our plant. And it was an interesting proposal to us is that we could, with literally less than half of the roof of our building, cover it with solar panels and create enough solar electricity to run our facility and basically make a net zero product.
So as you can see, it's not only cheaper, it increases yield, but it also is a net zero. So this is one of the key things that we've been focusing on from a C6 perspective is we want to invest in things that don't need government subsidies to survive. This is something where government subsidies, if they come in, great, it lowers the cost of capital, it increases the return. but that would just be padding the returns. This company can stand on its own 2 feet and continue to expand and grow and have very attractive margins because it's delivering a value not only to the farmer and to the oil and gas industry where energy and ag get to merge, but also to the consumer, because this is going to be increased yield, increased value from the crops, but lower cost. And who doesn't want lower cost in today's inflationary environment? So I appreciate the time. Is there anything you want to add before we let you go?
Yeah, like I say, it's interesting. Sulfur really wasn't looked at 10, 15 years ago. And just like I say, cleaning up the emissions, and the crops we're growing now, the diversity of the crop rotations, and even the increased yield due to seed genetics, growers' practices. We need to have more to get more. And we need, like I say, our target is to have no synthetics on the sulfate side or the sulfur side. And this is really reaching our goal. We're really happy with what we've got and the results we've been showing so far.
Well, thank you for your time. If you'd like to learn more, you can reach out directly to Murray himself or to me, as someone who is also lucky enough to be on the board and trying to help the company grow and expand, and I think reach the full potential that we both see going forward.
Thank you for the time, Mark.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, again, please let us know. And as always, we appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Prime Vision Network.